Hi, everyone, and welcome to How to Influence Congress. My name is Mary Glider, and I am part of the Indivisible Greater Grand Rapids Group. This webinar is the first in a monthly series of webinars that we will be doing to educate and activate people on a variety of issues important to us as concerned citizens. We'd also like to welcome Indivisible members joining us from other parts of Michigan, and a special shout out to Indivisible members in Stamford, Connecticut. We are delighted to have you here. A few housekeeping issues before we get started. This webinar is being recorded and it will be posted to our Facebook page. There is a monitored chat room where you can chat with other participants or ask questions. There will be about 40 minutes of presentation and then 15 minutes or so for Q&A after the presentation. We will address any questions related to the presentation during the official Q&A. At this time, I'd like to welcome our presenter, Charles Seigel, and tell you a bit about him. I met Charles when we were both in college at the University of Chicago. We were both involved in college radio, and I met Charles because we were both doing news on the campus station, which was WHPK FM. Back then, Charles was very, very involved in politics and continued to be so after graduation. He worked for 40 plus years for, with, and around congressional members and candidates, as well as city and local officials. He spent 30 years of his time as a lobbyist in Washington, D.C., and most of the U.S. states and Canada for companies in a number of controversial industries. He is my go-to person on anything political and is one of the few people I know who seems to know the name of just about anybody serving in Congress. Charles currently teaches government, politics, and political science part-time at the College of DuPage in suburban Chicago. Welcome, Charles.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here. I'm looking forward to talking to everybody.
Great. Okay, so we're going to pull Charles's presentation up. So Abby, if you could load those slides, and we'll walk through everything, and then we'll have Q&A at the end. Please do continue to chat in the chat room, ask your questions. We'll be gathering those. So Charles, take it away.
Okay, so we're going to talk first about just Congress, give you some background. I'm sure some of it will be some people know, but just to make sure that you kind of have the basics of Congress and how it operates. Then we'll talk a little bit about lobbying and the fact that that's what you want to do, basically. It's not just fancy lobbyists and fancy big expensive suits in Washington. And then how to talk to the members and that kind of thing, and then be happy to answer questions. We've really focused at Mary's suggestion on Washington and the federal officials, but we can also talk about others, however you want to do that. So next slide, please. So as you hopefully know, Congress is two different houses. These are pictures of them, the Senate on the top and the House on the bottom. The US Senate is 100 members, 2 come from each state, and they serve for 6-year terms. So 1/3 of them are elected every general election, which is every 2 years. The next general election is a long way away, it feels like right now, November of next year. The House is 435 members. That number used to change, but it's now set at that number. It's based on population, as you know, so every state has a number based on an algorithm that figures out based on population how they compare. A number of states have 1 member. The largest is California, which has 53, which is a fair amount. Michigan has 13, which is a pretty good number, pretty typical to kind of a mid-large state, I'd say. The House has a few other members. They're non-voting on the floor. They're from DC and all the different territories, but they can vote in committee, and that's why I mention it, because if you see someone from American Samoa or the Virgin Islands in a committee list, that's where they are members and can vote, but they can't vote on the floor of the House. They're all elected, as you know, 2-year terms, and they're all elected every 2 years. So everyone was elected last November, and then we'll be up again next November. Next slide, please. So how many represent you? I hope you know this. This is obviously a map of the congressional districts in Michigan. You have 3 members of Congress that represent you as a voter. 2 are your 2 US senators, and 1 is your Congress member from your local district, which if you look at the map, you can probably figure out which is yours, although you may know that already. And that's the 1 member who represents you in the House. Continue, please. Different houses have, the two houses in the Senate have different constitutional powers, and I think it's useful to know some of this. All revenue bills by the Constitution have to start in the House of Representatives. So any bill that raises money, that raises, changes taxes, has to start in the House. But of course, all bills have to be approved by both houses. And we'll get to that in a minute, right? The House can vote to impeach for any federal official, judges, anyone in the federal government. But that's impeaching them, which is the equivalent of kind of a grand jury indictment. And then it goes to the Senate. We'll get to that in a minute. The key point here to understand is that the House members are less powerful than members, the singular members in the Senate. First of all, there's a lot more. So that means that you're less powerful just in general. But the way the House operates, and we're going to talk about that versus how the Senate operates coming up, members in the House tend to be less powerful except in specific ways. So that's useful to know. The Senate is the one that has power, it's called advice and consent in the Constitution over presidential nominees and all federal court judges. And if you were looking for a really good political novel from the 50s, Advise and Consent is the name of in my opinion, the best American political novel ever. So the Senate takes an impeachment, takes the in effect indictment, and tries or convicts or acquits a federal official who's been impeached by a 2/3 vote. You have to have a 2/3 vote. You may remember we had a couple 8 years ago, I guess it was, when Trump first was was impeached twice, but then did not get the 2/3 vote to convict him. And those are the terms that are generally used. In the Senate, an individual member is more powerful than in the House for a number of reasons. One is there's simply less of them. There's 100 in the Senate, and there's 435 in the House. And there's other reasons we'll get into in a few minutes. So next slide, please. Okay, this was I thought the best, I wish it was in color, but it's still the best chart I could find on the internet that sort of gives you a good idea of how things operate. You can take a look even more later. It's pretty simple, obviously. You take a bill that starts in the House or the Senate. You see the two parallels on the top. It's introduced. It goes to committee, sometimes more than one committee, depending on the bill. It can be assigned to more than one committee. If it passes from the committee, it goes to the floor of that chamber, so the House floor or the Senate floor. If it passes there, it then goes to the other house, by meaning the House or the Senate. And then it's considered by the other house, the same kind of thing. It's sent if it's approved in the House, just as an example, once it's approved in the floor of the House, it goes over to the Senate. It gets assigned to a committee or more than one committee. It goes through that same process. If it gets through the committee, it goes to the House Senate floor. And then if it's approved, two things either happen. If they're both approved in exactly the same form, which is unusual or very unlikely, then it goes to the president for approval. What normally happens is you get two bills that may be similar, but there's differences. And then they're sent to what's called a conference committee. This is the one underneath the next step in this process. A conference committee is made up of equal members of the House and Senate, usually the people from the committee that have been really involved in the issue. And that conference committee works out a final agreed bill. So they have to negotiate and vote, and they come up with a bill, one final version that's called the conference report, but that's then sent back to the House and to the Senate. At that point, either the House and the Senate can only vote yes or no. They can't change it because they already had a chance to change it early on. Assuming it gets approved by the House and the Senate both yes, then it goes for final approval, which is to the president. The president can either sign the bill, obviously, and that makes it law. He can not sign it, but allow it to become law without signing it. But he can wait 10 business days, and then if he hasn't signed it and he hasn't done anything else, it becomes law, or he can veto it. And that does happen. It depends on the administration and a lot of other factors. It happens some more than others. But the president can veto it, and then it goes back, if it's vetoed, to the House and Senate. The House and the Senate together, the Congress, can override the veto, but only if they both vote by a 2/3 margin to override, which these days is very hard to get because we're so partisan. We'll talk a little more about that later, I think, but there's so much partisanship in the Congress now that it's very hard to get anything that's over kind of what the party vote is. So that's the general way of how a bill becomes a law. And we'll talk somewhat about later on about where the best places to affect that process is. Next slide. Now, quickly, just to get an idea, you may have seen this and not. I'm only mentioning it because if you're talking to senators or congressmen or the staff, you may hear references to these people, and you may not recognize the name, but just to give you an idea, this is the leadership of the U.S. Senate. The one in red is the person who's the most powerful in the Senate. That's the majority leader. Right now, it's John Thune, who's a Republican from South Dakota. The president of the Senate is presides over the Senate, but he's the vice president, and he really doesn't have much power in the Senate. He just presides. The majority leader is really the big power. Next. In the House, it's different because there's no one like the vice president who presides. The Speaker of the House, who's now Mike Johnson, a Republican from Louisiana, he is really the guy in charge. He presides over the Senate and makes a lot of the decisions and works with the majority leader, who unusually, it happens once in a while, is also from Louisiana. In fact, all three of the Republican leaders are from, oh no, there's Steve Scalise twice. I must have messed up. I didn't put in the majority whip. But anyway, both the Speaker and the majority leader are from Louisiana. And then the Democratic leader, a lot of times they're called the minority. Sometimes they prefer just to be called by their party. So the Democratic leader is the minority leader, who's currently Hakeem Jeffrey. The margin is very narrow in the House, as you may know, just a few votes. There's some special elections coming up. If there's a surprise in the special elections, the Democrats could actually take the House back, although I think that's pretty unlikely. But if they take it back in the general election next year, Hakeem Jeffries would be the new speaker. But that's a big question, what happens in the next election. We can talk about that later. Next slide, please. So what's the power of the leader? They're both very powerful, the majority leader and the speaker, in the way I'm talking about it. They decide what comes to the floor for debate and when. They're doing the timing. They have a major part in deciding which members get to which committees, which can be really powerful for someone's career or really help hurt someone's career. They decide which committee bills are assigned to, and they're the ones I said that some bills go to more than one committee. They can decide, well, I'm going to send this one to this committee, and then it has to go to that one, or just to one. And the speaker presides in the House. The majority leader does not preside over what's going on in the Senate. The minority, just decides strategy and opposition. They don't have the minority, and either one doesn't have a lot of power. They have more power in the Senate. We'll get to that, and then in the House. But they decide their strategy and try to oppose. Well, the criticisms that a lot of people are weighing against, for example, the minority in both the House and Senate, is they don't feel like they're very strong right now, or they're not being very powerful in their criticisms of the Republicans who run both the House and the Senate and the president. That's debated, I think, and you can debate one way or the other. But that's one of the points is the minority really taking advantage of as much as they can to oppose what's going on. Next slide, please. So if you've heard of the whip, it's not a big deal, but it's sort of a funny name. The whip is the person who's like the deputy leader, who corrals the votes, counts the votes, knows what the members are doing, what they think. They're supposed to be closest to all the members of their party in their House or Senate, and know what their issues are and whether they'll vote yes or no. A good whip has a pretty good idea of how people are going to vote in general. But then they have an organization of deputies and assistant whips to keep members informed and get the pulse of the members, kind of know what's going on. So that's a significant position, although the name sounds odd, but it can be the second or third leader in the leadership, and it can be very important. Next. So what's the operational difference that I've been referring to between the House and the Senate? The main one is that the House, the majority rules and really controls, as I say there. In the Senate, the minority has more power. In the House, to debate a bill on the House floor, they have to have what's called a rule. And there's a committee called the Rules Committee that sounds pretty routine, but it's one of the most powerful committees in the House, because they recommend what the rules should be for any bill that's being debated. And the House votes on it, but generally the majority party votes to approve it, so it's not really controversial most of the time. But the Rules Committee decides not only how much debate there should be, so they'll say, for example, we think this bill is important, there should be 4 hours of debate and each side has 2 hours, but they can decide what amendments can even be considered. If you're a member of the House and you want to propose an amendment to a bill that's on the floor, you have to go to the Rules Committee, show them what your amendment is, and they will decide whether they think it should even be considered or not. That's pretty powerful, right? So they can shut out people they don't want to take seriously, or they don't want that amendment. They think it's too controversial, or it could win, for example, and they may not want that. So there's a real control over the debate in the House that's very limited. And you'll see that if you ever watch C-SPAN and the debates in the House. The Senate is the opposite. Part of the tradition of the Senate is that there's no limit on debate. You may have heard this if you've heard of the filibuster. What happened is, it's nowhere in the Constitution, but under the sort of the history of the Senate, it got to be the point where they sort of became proud of saying that anyone could speak for as long as they wanted, and there's no limit. Now they can ask for unanimous consent to agree to a limit, but if the Senate didn't want, they would just not agree to it. So there's no rules committee. Anyone, when the senator is recognized, they can talk for as long as they want. There's some rules about that, but I won't go into it now. Don't take up the time. And you can actually, if you get recognized to speak, you can create a filibuster. You can talk for as long as you want. The more effective filibusters, of course, are more than one member because they can let each other talk and keep going. And that can sometimes kill a bill. It's happened before, where if there's enough members who are going to keep talking with each other and recognize each other, then they'll kill the bill. The only way you can stop that in the Senate, it used to be there was no way. Then it used to be 2/3 vote. Now it's 60 votes you need to force it. It's called cloture in the Senate. No one knows exactly where that word came from, but it sounds like closure, right? And so you have to get 60 votes to cut off the debate, and that's hard to get. So a member of the Senate has a lot more power in that sense to be able to get up and speak and keep going, and a small number can maintain a filibuster, which cannot be done in the House. Next slide. So the other part of the way the Congress operates is committees. You can't do everything on the floor where all 435 members or 100 members talk. So there's a whole bunch of committees that have specific areas. It's called the jurisdiction, and the people who are assigned to that committee usually are on it for a long time, and they become experts in that subject. And so they become the subject experts, basically. It's where a lot of members get their power from. Being a leader or an influential member on a committee, you can be very influential in policy in that subject area, and therefore you can be very powerful. And we'll get to it in a minute, but the chairman or the chairperson of a committee can be very powerful just because they're the chairman of the committee and they make a lot of decisions. It's where a lot of the work gets done. So I'm going to say a couple times probably in this presentation, the committee is the best place if you're looking to get change to a bill or get something in legislation. The committee is the best place to do that. The floor is very hard. You can see from the House, you may not a member may not even be able to get an amendment. I didn't mention the Senate, anyone who gets up can propose an amendment. That's the difference between the Senate and the House. But the committees are where a lot of this work gets done, and the members are really experts. So if you go to the banking committee, a lot of the members have been on for a long time, and they've learned a lot about banking or foreign policy or appropriations or any of that kind of thing. So there are some committees that are very powerful because of their jurisdiction. We'll talk about them in a minute. The committee have three purposes, basically. Obviously, to analyze, hold hearings, and move on legislation. Oversight. One of the things committees do, of course, if they want, particularly if they're run by the opposing party, the president, is hold hearings, look into and investigate things they think are going wrong, usually with the executive department agencies, but they can do other things too. I was watching it over. So there was a hearing just today, the one about we were talking earlier about the defense issue, and so they're sort of oversight. And then there are committees whose specialty is budget and appropriations. They set the budget for the government and then they appropriate the money. It's kind of confusing because there's two different processes on that, and there's different committees. But those are very powerful because they deal with billions and billions of dollars, obviously, and that can be really important. Okay, next slide. So what are some of why are some committees preferred? Quickly, just to give you a little background, a committee can have power or influence on a subject that you're interested in or that your district is particularly interested in. It can be relevant to your district. So for example, if you're a member, I live in Chicago, and so if you're a member of Congress from downtown Chicago, you really don't want to be on the agriculture committee, right? Because that committee oversees stuff that really your constituents are going to have very little interest in, right? Just as an example. And then there are others, for example. So transportation may be of interest to your district, it may not, various things like that. The other thing is fundraising depends a lot on which committees you're on. People who give money to your campaigns are going to pay a lot of attention to which committee you're on. And if you're on the less important committees, they're probably not going to fund you as much as before. And so I was once in one of these whip meetings when I worked on the Hill, and everyone was complaining. This is years and years ago. Everyone was complaining about how they couldn't raise any money. And one member said, well, that's funny. I'm having no trouble raising money. And everyone looked at her and said, you just got on the appropriations committee. That's why. And she said, oh, that's why. It seemed kind of odd that she hadn't figured it out. But so the committee really can matter a lot. Next slide. Some of the most powerful ones, I've mentioned some already, but the ones for various reasons that are considered powerful, appropriations and budget are separate committees that are very powerful on appropriating the money. Energy and Commerce in the House is a very big committee that has a lot to do with all sorts of things. The title, as you can see, is pretty broad, and they see over a lot of things. In the Senate, they have what's called the Finance Committee. In the House, the Ways and Means. Those are the ones that have to do with raising taxes. And so they can be really powerful and very influential about raising taxes, and a lot of lobbyists deal with them to try and get taxes lowered on their companies or stop them. Judiciary is the one that oversees various things about the law, about the judiciary process. In the Senate, they're the ones that consider nominations for attorney general and judges, and so that can be considered pretty powerful. And then foreign relations, a lot of members are interested in foreign relations. One of the reasons they like that is simply because they get to travel around the world, and they can like that a lot. It can be really interesting, as well as a lot of people call them junkets and they criticize them, and there are some times where they're justified for criticism. But if you're on these committees and you're focused on foreign policy, it can be a good thing to travel and see these other countries and meet. You get to meet a lot of, the leadership of a country and stuff like that. Next one, please. Subject committees that are popular: agriculture, if you're from a rural district, not if you're from downtown Chicago. Armed services is the military. If your district has a lot of military bases, for example, that matters a lot. Banking and financial services, banking in the Senate, financial services in the House oversee the banking process and all of that. And banks can be very influential, obviously. These days, Homeland Security is a really important one, and you can make a point about how you're trying to protect the country by being involved in that. And then in the Senate and the House, the ones that are to oversee various issues. In the Senate, it's called Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. If you ever want to talk about the HELP Committee, that's it, because that's its initials. In the House, it's had a number of different names, but it's been changed recently to Education and the Workforce. So those are popular committees. If you hear people on committees, the District of Columbia Committee, for example, I'm from the District of Columbia, but is not a powerful committee. Science and Technology is not considered powerful. There's some where generally freshmen get appointed to, and then they move on. We'll get to that. We'll show that later. But okay, next one, please. Or maybe we already did. So what's the power of the committee chair? This is important if you're talking to a committee chair to understand. The committee chairperson can schedule or not schedule hearings and votes on bills that are in their committee. There are lots of stories about many decades ago where racist chairs of important committees would just not hold hearings on bills that were for desegregation and things like that, and prevented them from ever getting considered. The chairperson has a staff that's what's called the majority staff that investigate, manage the committee, run the whole committee, and do a lot of the investigating on what they want. The chairman often, it depends on the committee, but often appoints what subcommittees there will be and appoint who the subcommittee chair is, so they can have a place in deciding. If I'm really interested in, as the chairman or chairwoman, if I'm really interested in this subject, I can appoint my buddy to be chair, or sometimes I can be the chair, and I can make sure that someone who I have agreement with will be the chair and do what I'd like. They also can, just like the speaker assigns bills to the committee, they assign bills to the subcommittee. So they have that power. And assigning it to the subcommittee sounds pretty routine, but if you know, for example, if you have a bill that you want to pass and you know that the chairman of that subcommittee, which it would normally go to, is against this bill, you may assign it to a subcommittee of a friend, or vice versa, right? So there's lots of ways you can influence the process that way. The other thing is the chairman manages the bill through the process. So when it gets through the committee and goes to the House floor, the chairman of the committee is usually the one who runs the debate and manages the bill, not the leadership. And so again, if it's gone to the floor and you want to influence what's going on, if you know the chair can get to the chairperson, they're going to manage that debate in the House and in the Senate, and that's important also. Now I mentioned here bottom discharge petition. The only way to get a bill out of a committee is to have what's called a discharge petition. They're very unusual. They're very unpopular. Most people, a lot of members won't sign them. But a discharge petition is if you can get a majority of the members of the chamber to sign, you can take it out of the committee and bring it to the floor. But again, you're going to get the wrath of the chairman and a lot of other people, and it's only done in very extreme circumstances. Next slide. Mine lost its. Is everyone seeing the whole thing?
Oh yeah, sorry, I don't know what happened there. Let me fix that. Sorry.
No problem. Okay, next please. Okay, there's a lot of staff for Congress, and we won't go into great detail, but just to give you an idea, the leadership of the two, I've mentioned who the leadership are. They have about 400 staff roughly between them all. Each of the members, the 535 members of the House and Senate, have a total of about 12,000 staff between them. They're their personal staff, it's called, who work for them directly in their office. The different committees I've mentioned have about 6,000 staff. And then the nonpartisan agencies, there's the Library of Congress, the Congressional Research Service, General Accounting Office, and the Congressional Budget Office. Those are all nonpartisan agencies that are part of Congress. They have about 12,500 staff. So there's thousands of people on the Hill who work for the members of Congress in various different roles. Now, one point that I think the reason I wanted to point this out is their average age is 35, and over 60% of the House staff are under 35. The House staff tend to be younger than the Senate staff. Senate tends to be a little older and have been there longer. They tend to be pretty educated. 85% of the staff have bachelor's degrees and 20% hold advanced degrees. So they're pretty educated. They're pretty, intelligent, but there are also a lot of them. And that's something you got to get used to if you're going to try and deal with the staff. One of the frustrations is that, you can deal with a staff member and then they leave, or the committee chair changes and they change the entire staff. And as a lobbyist who's dealt with over a number of Congresses, you get frustrated with having to start over again with new people. So you may just need to understand that's going to happen over time. After the next election, that's going to happen, for example. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're going to move to kind of lobbying and special interests. And what is that? What's an interest group? You've probably heard the phrase. The simple definition is it's an organization of people with shared policy goals trying to achieve those goals at different points in the process. That's any interest group. Now, people condemn interest groups, but you're an interest group, right? And we're going to talk about that more later too. However, what's a special interest? People talk a lot about special interests. And my cynical view about what a special interest is, anyone you don't agree with. You're going to hear people say, oh, that's a special interest. Well, if I don't agree with them, Republicans are going to say Democrats are a special interest. Democrats say Republicans are a special interest. And interest groups of all kinds tend to be represented by lobbyists, professional and otherwise. So there are interest groups and special interests all over Capitol and all over dealing with Congress members. But a special interest, there's nothing legal about a special interest. It's just a term to talk about your opponent and make it sound bad, basically. Next, please. What are the methods of interest groups? They're pretty obvious, but just to give an idea, one is directly lobbying. And we'll talk a little more about that too. One is electioneering. A lot of people who have interests in the process, either lobbyists or others, you work to get to people you want elected, right? And sometimes lobbyists do that, and they do a lot of that. And a lot of people, you're doing that, right? You're going to be working on helping candidates or people at some point get elected. Another method of an interest group is litigation, filing suit. We're seeing lots of suits, right, against the Trump administration right now, and they're filing litigation as another method of trying to make the argument for their interest group. And then there's always appealing directly to the public. You can appeal directly to the public to try and get the public on your side, and then write your congressman, do all sorts of different, or vote, or do what you want to help your interest in the process. So those are kind of the four main methods. Next slide, please. So what's a lobbyist? I use this only because I'm from Washington, D.C. This is the lobby of the Willard Hotel in Washington, which is a beautiful old hotel. And the reason I use it is because the Willard has been around for a long time, since the mid-1800s, in different forms in its location. And the word lobbyist, no one knows exactly where it comes from, but it's thought that it was because back in the old days in the 1800s, lots of members of Congress stayed at the Willard, and they still do. It's near the White House and not far from the Capitol. And people would wait in the lobby of the Willard for the congressperson they were looking for and buttonhole them when they were going in or going out. And so the theory is that's how they became known as lobbyists, because they were in the lobby waiting for them. No one knows for sure if that's true, but that's where the term comes from. Next slide, please. So what do lobbyists do? Again, I've been a lobbyist for a number of different companies. As Mary mentioned, some controversial companies and industries, controversial ones. As a lobbyist, you do various different things. The main thing is meet with and get to know members of the Congress, if you're lobbying the Congress, and their staff, and advocate for your interests, whatever it may be. Lobbyists are not only for companies, although we talk about it, but obviously all sorts of public interest groups have lobbyists. Public Interest Research Group, the Ralph Nader Group, has lobbyists, things like that. They provide, one of the things they provide that people sort of don't value as much, but members do, is they provide information as a subject expert. I worked in various different industries for them as a lobbyist, and I knew how my industry worked a lot better than members of Congress or their staffs do. So a lot of times I could provide information to them, and obviously you have to be upfront and tell the truth and tell both sides, but you provide information that helps them understand the issue. and you may help them understand it, hopefully towards your side. It may not always work that way. You provide political and legislative strategy. A lot of good lobbyists have worked on the Hill and been very smart about strategizing, and so they would provide help to sort of come up with politics and legislative strategies and do that. They also can do grassroots work. You get people, the grassroots are people all around the country to gin up and call their Congress people like you were going to be doing, and get meeting with them and do all things like that. Obviously, campaign contributions are important. Lobbyists will do a lot of campaign contributions, but they'll also get people in their organization, whatever it is, to contribute to politicians from personal and targeted. And a lot of lobbyists manage political action committees. I'm not going to get too much into a political action committee. I think we might a little bit more, but they're pooled groups which contribute to campaigns. And lobbyists also shepherd campaign contributions. As a lobbyist for our company, I often would be the person who would manage our political action committee, and I would ask people to contribute to certain candidates because there's limits to how much you can contribute. So I might get some of our leadership to contribute to the different candidates that was in our interest, and they'd ask me, and I'd talk about that. There are a lot of legal restrictions to how much, who, and when you can contribute to. I'm not going to bore you with it. It varies a lot. In Washington, they're different than each state, and each state has different rules. But do know that lobbying and political contributions and PACs are all pretty heavily regulated, although I honestly think they should be more, but they are regulated to some extent. Next slide, please. So when you're meeting with member and staff, are you a lobbyist? Yes. Again, the lobbyist is anyone basically who's talking to members of Congress or your legislators, but we're talking about Congress here, or their staff. And so you will be, if you choose to do this or have already in the past, a lobbyist too, although not a formal full-time lobbyist, for example. Next, please. So now we'll talk about how to lobby members of Congress. I have some advice, some basic ideas about the way to do it, what to do, and understand about the process, and then we can talk about if you have questions from that. Next, please. Okay, first of all, I think I repeat this by accident, but first of all, always be polite and request. I worked for a congressman. You dealt with people who come in all the time and yell and scream and be angry and unreasonable or unfair. You're not going to get your way by doing that. Don't demand what you want, right? This is a strong advice. Don't be polite. Request things. Ask them to do it. Don't ever say something like, and I can't tell you how many people would say things like, I elected you. I live in your district. I elected you, so you need to do what I want you to do, which is ridiculous, frankly, right? Or they say, if you don't do what I say, I'll defeat you the next time. I'll work to defeat you. Well, there are going to be people who are going to work to defeat anybody, and that's not a really strong threat. And it just makes for a hostile meeting, and I think personally, it makes the staff or the congressperson kind of tune you out after that. You should always be polite, be friendly, request things, make your case, but don't threaten. Next slide, please. So you also want to know the situation. If you're going to be talking to a staff or a member of Congress or something like that, know the status of the bill you're interested in, understand this process, which is one of the reasons why I went over a little bit, again, the process. We can go over it more, or you can learn it more, or I can help you another time. But if possible, know what the bill is you're interested in and the number, if you know the bill number and you're concerned about, you can find out its exact status. You can go to congress.gov, put in the bill number. If it started in the House, it starts with an HR and then a number. If it starts in the Senate, it's S with a number. And then it'll tell you congress.gov, or other ways will tell you what the status of the bill is. It'll say it's in this committee, or it passed the House and it's now in the committee in the Senate, or whatever. Know that when you talk to people, if you possibly can. It's really helpful. The members and the staff, we're going to talk about this more in a minute, but are really busy people. And they don't follow every bill. They can't. Even a person who's a legislative aide to a congressman for a certain subject won't know every bill that covers that subject. They may have a pretty good idea. So a lot of times when you come in and talk to them, they may ask you, well, what's the status of that bill? I know you're interested in it, but I'm not familiar with what's happened to it or where it is. And it can be really helpful if you can say, it's in the committee, it's got a hearing next Thursday, or whatever the story is, or it's in the Rules Committee. Different things like that can matter a lot. I'll tell you another funny story. In the House, it's very partisan. Democrats and Republicans don't talk to each other that much. And I would talk to this was when I dealt with the House back 20, 30 years ago. The House was Democratic run. And I would still go to the Republican members and staff and talk to them, even though they really weren't going to get much done. They'd ask me what was going on because the Democrats wouldn't tell them what was going on. So I could help them. And I made some friends that way by saying, well, the bill's this and that, and this is what's going on. And they didn't know that because the Democrats wouldn't tell them. The other thing that's useful to know is if you're going to talk to a member of Congress or their staff, does the member of Congress already have a position on this bill? If you go in and want them to take a position, if you already know that they've announced that they're on the opposite side, you may still want to go record that I don't agree with you and I really wish you'd change your mind, but it's helpful to know that you don't agree with them, right? And that you wish they'd change their mind. If they've announced their position, it's just useful to know that. Sometimes the party does that after all. You know, these days, again, in the House and Senate, members of one party are likely to vote all the same way. So you may know that the speaker's taken a position, and that means that most members are going to vote the same way if you're talking to a Republican, and so it's useful to know, okay? Also know who the key players are on the issue. As I mentioned, the committee chair and the ranking member is the leader in a committee of the minority party. And that's the person who would become chairman if they take, or chairwoman if they take over the committee the next time. If you can know who the key players are, who are the people who, besides the chair in the committee, who people listen to and are influential, once again, that can be really helpful. Okay, and are you talking to one of them or not? Sometimes if you go into a meeting and you know that this person is really influential or is not, you may still want to talk to them, but you may know that their opinion isn't gonna, if they're not that influential, isn't gonna make a big difference, and that can be useful too. And are they in the majority or the minority? Once again, find out the party and whether they're going to be part of the majority of the minority. I used to travel a lot state to state. I did a lot of work in many of the different states around the country. And when I would sit down with my lobbyists before a meeting, I would say, all I wanted them to do is tell me, obviously, the person's name, what their party was, and where in the state they were from. Because I had a pretty good idea of the politics of the state enough to tell me, that would tell me a lot. Once again, are they urban or rural or suburban or things like that? Next slide, please. So one other thing, as I've said, you may have a very short time to make your point. These people are really busy. Even if you're meeting with a member, they may come in from a vote. They may have to leave to another vote. They may have another meeting in 15 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever. It's not inconsiderate to you. It's that they just have a really busy schedule. And that's true with some staff too. So you have to be prepared to make your elevator pitch. I hope you've heard that phrase before, right? If you meet someone in the elevator and you're going down 3 floors, you got to be prepared. What are you going to say to them when they're going to run out of the elevator when you're done? The best you can have in your mind, here's what I want to say. If I only have 30 seconds or a minute or so, and then you can expand on it when you have more time, okay? So you want to be brief and to the point, start with a summary of what you're saying. Don't give a whole lot of history at first. And if there's more time, you can elaborate and you can talk about the history, but don't start with a long start about your own personal history and all that, because you may lose the chance to say what you really wanted to say. Obviously, if there's something that's really important to you, but they know about you, that's worth saying too. But just make sure that you have this elevator pitch and it's part of a short presentation. Okay, don't give them a lot of background on the issue. You would normally assume that they know it unless they say, I'm sorry, I really don't know about that issue. They've probably already heard from many other, if you're lobbying them on an issue, they've probably heard about it from other people already. And so they have some pretty good idea what it is. That's their job after all, right? You're talking to someone whose job it is generally speaking to know the issues. And again, if you're talking to a staff person, most of them, that's their specialty. They're a legislative aide on a certain number of issues, and this would be one of them, hopefully. So they should know about that. Next slide, please. Now, I've mentioned the staff a lot, and I always make this point because a lot of people don't understand this or take it for granted. Members of Congress, as I said, are very busy. They're in Washington often only Tuesday to Thursday, which is when the Congress meets and the committees meet normally. And they fly home unless they're from far away, and their home districts on Friday to Monday. You can meet them in your district, for example, if you can, usually between Friday and Monday. But they have very busy schedules. They can't meet with everybody. You may want to meet with them, and they may say you may talk to the schedule, and the schedule will say, I'm sorry, your congressperson can't meet with you, particularly if it's a limited number of days or whatever, but his staff person can, or her staff person can. So a lot of people go, well, I don't want to talk to staff person, I want to talk to the member. Don't underestimate the staff. As I've sort of said already, Staff members can be really influential. They can hold, they already researched the issue, they know the issue, they advise their member on how to vote in many cases, and know how the member thinks on a lot of things, and they can really be important as to affecting that member on the thing. So don't feel like you've been shunted aside if you're meeting with a staff member. Take advantage of that opportunity. They may also have a little more time for you too. The Congress people depend on their staff to know these issues. They can't know every issue. So they're going to talk to the staff. The chart on the right is a typical House member's main office. Now, Senate members are much bigger, mostly. They all are, but some are very much bigger. But a typical House member has as an office like this, where the staff members, in this case, on the right-hand side, they have a private office and a bathroom, but you have an entry area. The chief of staff's office goes into the member's office, and then all the other staff are in this room to the left here, and they all share little cubicles. And so they're all working close together. They know each other pretty well. They work together well, and they can be very important. So all I would say again is don't underestimate the staff. If you talk to a staff member, think of this person as influential on the issue and take advantage of it. Okay, next. And I'm not saying that just because I was a staff member. The other thing is know the status of the subjects you're interested in, figure out what's most critical, and focus on the most important. What is your priority? You know, of a lot of issues, there's a lot of different things in Congress. There's different bills or issues going on, even in the area that you're interested in. And the most important thing, again, they may say, well, what's most important to you? Which bill or what issue or what do you want to happen? A lot of people come in and kind of meander around and say, I'm interested in this issue and that and all that. Have it in your mind what you really want to focus on and what your priorities, and then you can tell them that. And they'll appreciate knowing it that way also. Next, please. Okay, so I mentioned before, we'll go through this quickly. The committee is the best place to affect a legislation that's already going through the process. You're going to have less impact if it's on the floor. You may have some, you might be able to have some, but it's very much more difficult. The committee, when it's in the committee or going to a committee, you can. The most best way is if you know someone is writing a bill, you can have influential in the original version of the bill. And that can be really, really influential, but that's very unlikely, you know. So the best thing to think about is the committee is the best time in the process to influence it. Next, please. Now, one thing that's important, as you may know, but it's important to say, members of Congress will listen to their constituents more than other people, right? If you vote for them, if you live in their district or their state for senators, they're going to listen to you far more. If you live in Michigan and call a senator from Illinois, no offense, they'll write down what you said and they'll keep a tally, but they're really interested in what people from Michigan or from their districts, from Illinois or from their district say. And so if you're talking to someone, you still talk to other people and can still make your points. But if you're talking to someone and you're a constituent, you live in their state or their district, you absolutely want to make that point because you'll be much more significant and more important. If you are from their district and didn't vote for them, don't tell them that. Okay? I had a company I worked for where the guy who ran it once told me that he went and met with a couple members of Congress. He was a Republican and he met with Democrats, and he made a point of telling them that he was a Republican and didn't support them. And there's no reason to say that. It doesn't matter. So why say it? Why be offensive? And why basically make them less interested in how you do it? If you did vote for them, you can mention it, but don't make a big deal out of it like they owe you or anything. I mentioned that before. Next. I think we're pretty close, Mary, so I'll finish this up, I think, in the next couple. In fact, this may be the last one. This is, again, the thing I said before. Don't say I elected you or we'll defeat you next time. Next.
Okay, awesome.
That's it, right? Yeah. Look at that, 7:15. Perfect.
Well, thank you, Charles, for that presentation. I certainly learned quite a bit, especially about committees and really doing my homework before I go in and talk to a representative and senator. So we did get some questions that came in through. So I'm going to start out with this one. And I guess I've had this question myself. And thank you to Betsy for sending in this question. Would it help to contact committee members even if they're not your senator or representative?
So as I said, they will not take you as seriously as others, but yes, it can. Only in the sense that, once again, every member hears from people from all over, and they have staff that answer the phone, they have staff that read the mail, and they will keep a tally. They basically keep a tally for their congressperson and say, we got, there's like a weekly report that says, here's what the letters and the calls were about. These were the subjects, and it was on this side. 27 were on this side, 25 were on that side, things like that. They'll usually keep, if they do it right, they'll keep out and do a separate report about the constituents. So they'll tell them that people called, but they will be less interested. But it doesn't hurt in a way to sort of, you can still pressure them. For example, if it really depends, but if there's an issue where there's a big upheaval, and I'm thinking about, for example, with what Elon Musk is saying and they're saying about Social Security. I worked on the Hill one time many years ago where Social Security I don't remember for sure, but there was a proposal to cut back the increase in Social Security, not cut Social Security, cut back the increase. And a lot of Social Security people protested on the Hill. And even when the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, which is the committee that considers this, would have considered it, came out of his office basically and walked across the street to the Capitol, they would throw eggs at him and stuff like that. And he got tired of this, right? And so he basically withdrew the proposal because he did get. So I'm not suggesting you throw eggs at members of Congress, but basically the passion was so strong that they felt that and they began to see it. Something like what Musk is doing on some of these issues, I think that's going to happen if he proposes, reducing Social Security or cutting Social Security or things like that, or Medicare. And so the same thing I think is going to happen, and it'll probably turn around. It just takes a lot of work and a lot of effort. So yeah, I'm not saying don't call them, but just be aware that there's going to be less interest. I would try and make your point more quickly and then get off the phone and let them keep answering the phone or reading the mail. Okay.
Okay,
If you're a
great.
constituent, definitely make the point. Sorry, Mary.
Okay, here's another question. If you have a particular interest, how might we get access to the committee involved? And that question came to us from Luann.
I'm sorry, you broke out and I couldn't hear most of the
Okay,
question.
if you
Can
have a
say it again?
particular interest, what's the right way to get access to the committee that's involved in that particular interest?
So as I said, there are different kinds of committees. We took out a slide that would have gone more into detail about that because I thought we thought it wasn't as important. But there are different kinds of committees. They're generally called the standing committees, which is the ones I've talked about. And as you saw, they generally have areas of jurisdiction, both in the Senate and the House. You can generally figure out or call your congressman's district office. I didn't mention district offices, but every member of Congress has offices in their district or their state. So if you want to talk to your congressperson, I know one of them is a woman, so I want to say congressperson, you can call the district office and talk to someone there and ask them that. Hey, I'm really interested in the subject of taxes, but I'm not clear which committee it is. Can someone tell me? And they'll help you figure it out. So a lot of times, if you look at a list of the committee names, you'll figure it out yourself, right? But I mentioned taxes, for example, because unless you didn't know, Ways and Means is the tax committee, and that name doesn't really indicate it. So if you're interested in taxes, you wouldn't know by looking at the list that you're talking about the Ways and Means Committee. So you can find out from your congressperson, or even just read the list of committees and see if you can figure it out that way. Okay.
Here's like a real odd kind of a question that I've often wondered myself too.
Okay.
How do you get an appointment with a congressperson?
That is a very good question, and it can be really difficult. It is tough. As I said, they have very busy schedules. They just can't have every single person in their district who wants an appointment to get one. There are a few different ways. First of all, you have a more likely chance of getting it back in your district where you all are than you are in Washington. People stop in their Washington offices. A lot of interest groups have, when they go to Washington and go talk to their congressman's office. But if you call your congressman's office and say, I want to talk to him or her, and I can meet with them here on a Friday or a Monday, or even over the weekend, but they don't usually do their office on the weekends, you have a better shot. The other thing, again, is a group. So if you say, I'm your constituent and I want to meet with you, you're a lot less likely to be able to get a meeting than if you say, we're the indivisible group of Grand Rapids and we have 125 members in your district, and we would like to meet with you. We have a committee that would like to meet with you. Obviously, that's more likely, right? Now, if you say you're the indivisible member and your congressperson is a Republican, they probably won't meet with you because they know you're not going to agree. So be careful what you say in that sense. But if you think it can be helpful to try and do that kind of thing. If you can't, one of the reasons I mentioned don't underestimate the staff. a lot of times they're going to say, I'm sorry, the congressman just doesn't have time to meet with you, but we'll have you meet with a staff person. And that's not a brush off to be offended by. There are certain staff people, I joke about it, I joked with Mary, I'm not going to go into it, but there are certain staff people, if you get, it could be kind of an insult. But generally speaking, you're going to get a legislative assistant or someone who covers the subject, and that's why they're going to ask you what subject you want to talk about, and that's not an insult. Don't be offended by being off the staff, because it's hard to get these appointments.
Okay, I got a general question that a few people have asked this one. And there's been a lot of debate, even within Indivisible, about what's the best way to contact, your Congress people if you're not going to request a meeting. But is it better to send them like a detailed email? Is it better to leave a message with staff, leave your story with staff? Is it better to do a letter? And any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I keep saying letters, but of course I'm old enough that I keep saying letters and I mean email generally, right? But I think it depends. If it's a detailed, if you want to make a detailed comment, then you want to send an email. You want to write up something and edit it and be careful and send something. If you just want to call and say, hey, I want my congressman to vote no on this bill that's on the floor next week, just call and tell them that, and they'll tally it up like that, right? If you don't have a lot to say, it's easier probably on the phone, and particularly on the district office. But either way, you can call the Washington office and get listed too. But if you really have points you want to make, and you really write it, you can write it down. I highly recommend an email or a letter versus a phone call, because they're not going to have the time to listen to you on the phone if you have a lot of
Okay, I want to get your comments on something. So we've had a
Okay.
little bit of an argument going on here in the chat room about
Uh-oh.
your comment that people should be polite when they call. And, I think that things have just become so
Yes.
divisive. And
Yes.
we've seen here in Indivisible, in Michigan, that people are just really angry and they feel that they're not being listened to, and they kind of want to fight fire with fire. So give us your thoughts on that. And this is going to be our last question, so it's okay to take a couple minutes.
Okay. As you say that, it's really an interesting question, and it's really an interesting thing to try and think about how do you answer it. What I would say is you can be angry and be polite. Those are not opposing things, right? If you get on the phone and yell, they're not going to take you seriously. No matter how angry you are, if you show that you're angry, it's just not going to be a useful conversation, first of all. If you call someone and say, I am furious and this is why, but you're still polite, you're still respectful, you're going to get your point across a lot better. Now, maybe people are writing and don't agree, but I don't think there's a lot of anger in politics, and I was going to say right now, but there has been for a long time. And one of the things people talk about is let's try and tamp down all the noise and the anger. It's really hard. I mean, I agree with you all. Obviously, it's very hard in this current atmosphere to not be furious about what Trump is doing and what Elon Musk is doing and what the Congress is doing. And it's really hard. And I don't think there's anything wrong with getting that across, but in a polite way. If you just want to call and yell at someone, you're not going to achieve very much. And I just don't think it's going to be very helpful for you or for the member, unless you're just call your therapist and yell at them instead.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, well,
you're paying them to listen to you. That's why I said it.
Yeah, that wraps up our Q&A. We got a lot of questions and we just couldn't get to all of them. We'll have just some discussion here amongst our leadership team and see, Charles, I maybe reach out to you just for some answers to some of the questions, and maybe we can get an email out. But
Sure.
I want to thank you so much again for spending this time with us. I also want to thank my fellow team members who've been monitoring the chat, and also Abby Tenenbaum, who's been running through the slides and keeping us on track
Thank you,
here.
Abby.
So thank you so much. Abby, if you could put up our last slide, the event slide. We do have some exciting events that are coming up over the next 6 months, and I want to call attention to some of these, especially for you folks who are here in the Grand Rapids area. So this coming Saturday at Fountain Street Church, we're going to have a protest sign making social. We've been getting a lot of input from members that they want to get together in person and be with their people. So this will be a fun event to come to. Just, bring a snack, bring your favorite beverage. We'll have cardboard, we'll have some paints and markers. If you've got art supplies you like, bring those along. We've got a Hands Off West Michigan rally and march on Saturday, April 5th from noon to 2 p.m. That will be at the Rosa Parks Circle. Watch for more information to come out on that. And actually, our next Zoom webinar will be on Monday, April 21st at 7:30 p.m. And we're going to have Senator Mallory McMorrow and Representative Phil Scabbs do kind of the same thing that Charles just went through here. So how do laws get made in Michigan? What are the committees? But what's the best way to interact? And I know there was at least one question in the chat about that. And also, I don't have it on the slide, but we're doing regular bridge takeovers every Friday. So I believe this coming Friday, it's going to be on the Fuller Avenue Bridge. You can find all of our upcoming events on our Indivisible Greater Grand Rapids Facebook events page. And be sure to sign up for our Substack newsletter. You can see a QR code here on the right-hand side of the screen. That will keep you up to date on what events we're planning, as well as what legislation, the status of it, what we need you to do, if we need you to call, Slotkin or Peters or your state reps, you can get some help there. So I just want to say thanks to everybody for attending tonight. And remember, get out there and get involved. Thanks and have a great night.